It was the first day of school, and Leah Harris stood alone in her classroom, watching the morning light stretch across the rows of empty desks. Room 214, the same room she'd been in for nearly a decade. Posters line the walls. History has eyes on you. Speak truth, even when it's uncomfortable. And a framed photo of a bridge in Selma, Alabama. Her lesson plan was written in precise lines on the whiteboard. Unit 1. Reconstruction and Resistance. Leah adjusted her cardigan and glanced at the clock. 7:54 a.m. The bell would ring in 6 minutes. She took a deep breath. This year felt different. The country was tense. People were watching teachers now, especially teachers like her. Teachers who didn't just skim the surface, but dug into the deep, uncomfortable truths of American history. She thought of her students, wide-eyed 8th graders who had never heard of Juneteenth, who thought Rosa Parks only said no, and who could tell you every U.S. president, but not one name from the Harlem Renaissance. She loved teaching them, loved watching the spark of awareness in their faces. That was why she came back every year, even now, especially now. The bell rang, and just like that, the room was full. Leah greeted them one by one. Welcome. Find your seat. Wherever you sit today is your seat for the semester, so choose wisely. Some groaned. Others laughed. A few pulled out phones, only to be reminded by the sign near the door. This is a no-scroll zone. By 8:05, they were all seated. Leah stood at the front of the class. My name is Miss Harris, she said. I teach history. Real history. The kind you won't always find in textbooks. A few heads popped up. She smiled. If you're here to memorize dates and color maps, you're in the wrong room. If you're here to understand how we got to where we are and who paid the price along the way, you're exactly where you need to be. The class buzzed with quiet energy. She handed out journals. No names on the covers, just pages waiting to be filled. Your journal stays here. You write freely, but you write thoughtfully. These are not for grades. They're for growth. A boy in the front row raised his hand. Are we going to talk about slavery? Leah nodded. Yes, and not just in one chapter, because it wasn't just one chapter. A girl near the back chimed in. Are we going to talk about, protests and stuff? Like, now? Leah met her gaze. We're going to talk about the then and the now, and how they're connected. Another hand. Are we allowed to disagree with you? Leah grinned. You're encouraged to, as long as you can explain why. That got a few surprised looks and a few smirks. But they were listening, and that was everything. After class, one of the girls lingered by the door. Miss Harris, my mom said not to get political in school, but I like what you said. Leah smiled gently. Telling the truth isn't political. It's history. The girl nodded, eyes wide, and left. Leah sat at her desk as the hallway noise faded. First class of the year. Already a seed had been planted. She didn't know yet how deep the roots would run, or how strong the storm would be. But she knew one thing for certain. The bell had rung, and she was ready. By the second week of school, Leah Harris was in rhythm. Her students knew the routine. Journals opened as soon as the bell rang. Phones stayed away. Discussions were sharp, sometimes messy, but always honest. They had covered the failures of Reconstruction, the rise of Jim Crow, and were now tracing the threads of resistance that wove through history like a heartbeat. Every day, Leah pushed her students to ask harder questions. Why do you think this law existed? Who benefited? Who suffered? What would justice have looked like back then? What does it look like now? She was proud of the way her students were engaging. They weren't just memorizing history, they were connecting to it. But not everyone was happy. One Thursday afternoon, Leah was called into the assistant principal's office. "Just a quick check-in," Miss Draper said with a tight smile. Leah knew that tone. It was the same one people used before asking her to shrink. She sat across from Draper, hands folded in her lap. "A few parents have reached out," Draper began, her voice overly calm. "Nothing major, just questions." Leah tilted her head. "About what?" Draper shifted in her chair. "Some are concerned that your lessons are a little heavy. They feel their kids are coming home upset, confused. One parent said their daughter cried after a discussion about lynching." Leah stayed still. "We discussed the Red Summer. I warned them it would be difficult." "Right," Draper nodded. "But maybe soften the tone a bit. Focus more on the resilience side of history, less on the trauma." Leah's jaw tightened. "The trauma is part of the story. Without it, the resilience is just decoration." Draper offered a thin smile. "We're just asking for balance. We don't want any parents to feel alienated." Leah stood. "History is alienating, Ms. Draper, especially when you were never meant to survive it." She walked out without another word. The next morning, Leah arrived to find a flyer slipped under her door. An upcoming PTA meeting. Highlighted in yellow, concerns about curricular direction in social studies. Her name wasn't printed, but it didn't need to be. She could hear the gathering storm. In class that day, Leah was quieter than usual. The students noticed. "You good, Miss Harris?" one boy asked. She smiled faintly. "Just thinking." But inside, she was turning over every sentence she'd said over the past week. Every slide she'd shown. Every moment where a student went home and said something their parents didn't want to hear. That night, she rewrote the next day's lesson. Not to water it down, but to make it unshakable. The lesson was on school integration. She started with photos, angry white crowds, little ruby bridges with marshals at her side, protest signs that didn't hide their hate. Then she brought out the court transcripts from Brown versus Board. She didn't speak for 10 full minutes. She let the history do the talking. When she finally looked up, the room was silent. "This isn't ancient history," she said quietly. "There are teachers in this building who were alive when this happened." One student whispered, "That means some of their parents were in those crowds." Leah nodded. "And some of yours were not even allowed in the same schools." The bell rang. Nobody moved. Then slowly they packed up, quiet and thoughtful. As the last student left, Leah saw a small note left behind on a desk, scrawled in pencil. "Thank you for not lying to us." She held it in her hand long after the room had emptied, because she knew what came next. And she knew this time the truth wouldn't protect her, but it would be worth it. Leah pushed open the door to the faculty lounge and felt the temperature drop, not because of the AC, but because of the silence. 3 teachers sat by the microwave. One of them, Mr. Kellerman, glanced up from his coffee and nodded. The others avoided eye contact. It wasn't always like this. Last year, Leah had eaten lunch here almost daily, talked curriculum, shared weekend plans, even laughed. Now it was different, colder, measured, careful. "How's your unit going?" Kellerman asked, his voice trying too hard to be casual. Leah smiled politely. "Strong engagement, some good conversations. Heard about the PTA meeting," he said, watching her reaction. Leah kept her voice even. "It's open to the public." Kellerman gave a half shrug. "You know how it is. Some folks just don't like discomfort." "History is uncomfortable," she replied. "That's not new." A long pause. Then the bell rang, and just like that, they were all up and out. That afternoon, Leah checked her mailbox in the front office. Inside was a manila envelope. No return address. She opened it and found a packet of anonymous parent feedback forms. Most were unsigned. Some were typed. "I don't send my child to school to feel guilty. Miss Harris is turning our kids against America. She needs to stick to facts, not feelings. Why does she talk about race so much? My daughter just wants to pass the test." Leah read every word, then calmly folded the papers and put them back in the envelope. She walked straight to the principal's office. Principal Darrell was in his usual chair, tie loosened, face unreadable. "Close the door," he said. Leah did. "You read them?" he asked. "Yes." He nodded, sighing. "Look, I know this isn't easy. There's been a lot of attention." "You mean pushback?" He paused. "We're just asking you to be mindful." "Of what? Teaching honestly?" "Of tone, of balance, of the community." Leah sat straighter. "I am the community, Darrell." He blinked. "I live here. I vote here. I went to school here. If I'm too much for this place, then maybe the problem isn't me." He shifted in his chair. "This isn't personal." Leah stood. "For me, it always is." That night, Leah stayed late in her classroom. She rewatched a clip from an old documentary, Fannie Lou Hamer speaking with fire in her voice, refusing to be silent. "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired," Leah whispered the words back to the screen. Me too. She looked at her lesson plan for the next day, the Civil Rights Act, and the pushback that followed. She didn't change a thing. She didn't cross anything out, because no matter what they whispered in the lounge, or wrote on their feedback forms, or said behind closed doors, she was still teaching, and the bell would still ring. Leah parked at the far end of the school lot, away from the cluster of luxury SUVs lining the front. She walked toward the auditorium with her lesson planner clutched like a shield. The PTA meeting had been rebranded as a curriculum community forum. But Leah knew what it really was. A stage. And she was the target. Inside, the air buzzed with polite tension. Parents filled the seats, murmuring in low voices. Some nodded as Leah walked by. Others pointedly didn't. On stage sat Principal Darrell, Assistant Principal Draper, and a moderator from the district. Leah was given a seat to the side, slightly lower, symbolic. The moderator tapped the mic. Thank you all for coming. Tonight, we want to hear your concerns, your hopes, and your vision for a balanced, inclusive educational experience. Leah kept her face neutral. They always said inclusive when they meant don't make people uncomfortable. The first speaker was a woman in pearls and a navy blue sweater set. We value education, of course, she began sweetly. But some of us feel that lately, the line between education and indoctrination has blurred. A few heads nodded. My daughter comes home upset. Says she feels guilty for things she didn't do. That's not what school should be. Leah kept her hands still in her lap. The next speaker, a man in a golf shirt, spoke with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We just want to know that our kids are being taught to love their country, not to feel ashamed of it. Finally, the moderator turned to Leah. Ms. Harris, would you like to respond? Leah stood. The mic buzzed slightly as she leaned in. I don't teach shame. I teach truth. And sometimes truth is uncomfortable. Not because it's wrong, but because it was never meant to be told. A few scattered claps. She continued. Your children aren't upset because I failed them. They're upset because, for the first time, they're learning that the world isn't always fair and that they have a role in making it better. That's not indoctrination. That's education. The room was quiet. Then came the first raised voice. But why so much focus on race? Why always slavery, segregation, protest? Why not focus on unity? Leah met his gaze. Unity without truth is just silence. Later, as the crowd thinned and murmured its way into the parking lot, one parent approached Leah quietly. My son never liked history before. Now he talks about your class every night. Leah nodded. That means more than you know. But as she drove home, exhaustion settled in. Not just from the meeting, but from the effort of having to defend facts as if they weren't opinions. She passed the glowing sign in front of the school. Truth builds character. Leah whispered to herself. Then let them let me teach it. It started with a calendar update. Friday morning, Leah checked her email and saw the subject line. Meeting request. Immediate review of curriculum materials. No greeting. No details. Just a time. 2:30 p.m. Principal's office. She closed the email, exhaled slowly, and returned to her lesson on the Voting Rights Act. That afternoon, she walked into the office to find not just Principal Darrell and Assistant Principal Draper, but a third person sitting across the desk. District Curriculum Liaison. Ms. Harris, the liaison said with a smile, too smooth to be kind. We're here to review concerns brought to us by the community. Concerns about what? Darrell cleared his throat. Some of your materials. Lesson plans. The topics you've chosen to emphasize. They're in the state standards. Leah replied. Yes, Draper said quickly, but how they're presented. Tone matters. The liaison slid a paper across the desk. Suggested modifications for cultural sensitivity and neutrality in historical instruction. Leah scanned the bullet points. Reduce emphasis on racial injustice during founding era. Avoid extended discussion of modern protest movements. Replace personal narratives from marginalized groups with broad civic themes. Leah looked up, pulse steady. You want me to erase the very people who shaped the struggle. We're asking for balance, the liaison said. No, Leah replied. You're asking for silence. They didn't argue. They just handed her a final document. Administrative recommendation, paid leave pending curriculum review. Effective immediately. Leah blinked. You're removing me. Temporarily, Darrell said, until the district can finish evaluating your approach. Leah stood slowly. I'm being punished for telling the truth. No one replied, so she said it again. I'm being punished for telling the truth. And she walked out. Word spread by the end of the school day. Whispers in the halls. Group texts. A student posted a TikTok titled, "They suspended my teacher for teaching history." It hit 20,000 views overnight. At home, Leah sat in her kitchen, fingers tracing the edge of her untouched coffee mug. The silence felt loud. The next day should have been just another lesson. Instead, it was the start of a fight. Because if they could silence her, they could silence anyone. And Leah Harris was not done ringing the bell. By Monday morning, Leah's classroom door stayed shut. The whiteboard was blank. The desks were untouched. And the students, they noticed. Big time. Where's Miss Harris? Did she quit? Did they fire her? No official announcement came. No substitute. No memo. Just an empty room and a silence that made everything louder. Zoya Barnes, one of Leah's top students, wasn't having it. At lunch, she pulled together a group of friends from class. They met behind the library, phones out, hearts racing. They want us to pretend she wasn't here, Zoya said. To pretend like the truth didn't matter. We can't let that happen. They started a Google Doc, named it The Truth Still Matters. By 3 p.m., it had more than 100 student signatures. By 5 p.m., someone had posted a TikTok montage of Leah's lectures, her quotes, her smile at the end of each class. Speak the truth, even if your voice shakes. The video was raw, unfiltered, powerful. It went viral by midnight. The next morning, Zoya and her classmates showed up in all black. T-shirts with white tape across their chests. History isn't controversial. They gathered in the courtyard between second and third period. Not loud, not rowdy, just still. A silent sit-in. By the time the bell rang, over 200 students had joined. Principal Darrell watched from his office window, lips pressed in a tight line. Assistant Principal Draper appeared at his door. "Do we shut it down?" He shook his head slowly. Not yet. The cameras were already rolling. Local news vans were parked outside the school gates by lunch. Meanwhile, Leah sat on her porch at home, watching the student-led protest unfold on her phone screen. She didn't cry. She couldn't. She was too stunned, too proud, too furious that her students had to do what grown adults wouldn't. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Zoya. "They can take you out of the room, but they can't erase you." That evening, the school board received over 400 letters from current students, alumni, and parents. Some were furious, but most were grateful. Grateful for a teacher who had taught with courage. Grateful for a class that made them think. Grateful for the truth. Leah closed her laptop after reading the last message. She whispered, not to the room, but to the idea that had guided her since the very first day. The bell still rings, even when I'm not there to hear it. The protest made headlines. Local news anchors used words like divisive, emotional, and controversial. Social media exploded with split reactions. Half the town was applauding the students. The other half, demanding Leah be fired. The school board released a carefully worded statement. "We support open dialogue, but we also have a duty to maintain community trust and curricular neutrality." Leah read it twice, then set her phone down. Neutrality. The word sounded harmless. But she knew better. Neutrality was what let injustice sit unchallenged. It was the silence after the lie. Back at school, things grew tense. A few teachers quietly supported the student protests, but most stayed silent, afraid of being targeted themselves. Zoya and the other students didn't stop. They started a podcast, the Unedited History Club. They invited local activists, former students, even a retired teacher who had faced similar censorship. Leah listened to every episode. Each one was a spark. Then came the backlash. A group of parents launched a campaign called Protect Our Classrooms. Flyers appeared around town. A slick website went live, filled with misleading quotes and out-of-context screenshots from Leah's lessons. The phrase, agenda-driven teaching, appeared more than once. At the next school board meeting, the auditorium was standing room only. People yelled. People cried. A man in the back shouted, "If she wants to teach activism, she should do it on her own time." A woman responded, "Teaching history isn't activism, it's education." The meeting was cut short. No resolution, only heat. Leah watched it all from home, but she wasn't alone. A local reporter had asked to interview her. At first, she declined, but that night, she opened her laptop and typed a letter. To the board, to the town, to everyone. "I have never asked students to agree with me, only to think critically, only to ask questions, only to seek truth. If that is now a problem, then the problem isn't my teaching. It's the fear that truth reveals." She clicked send. Then she clicked publish, and the letter spread like fire. Former students shared it. Teachers around the country reposted it. Advocacy groups reached out. The district froze. For the first time, they were not in control of the story. Zoya texted again. They thought they could shut the door. You turned on a floodlight. Leah smiled. She could feel the tide shifting. Not fast, but forward. The vote was scheduled for a Tuesday night. The room would be open to the public. One item on the agenda: review of teaching contract Leah Harris. No matter how they tried to spin it, everyone knew what it meant. Her job was on the line. Hours before the meeting, Leah sat in the back row of the community library, surrounded by folders, messages, and clippings. She hadn't planned to speak, but silence, she realized, had never protected her. By 6 p.m., the school auditorium was packed. Students held hand-painted signs. "Truth isn't political. Let Leah teach." Parents filled the back rows. Reporters lined the walls. And at the front sat the board. 7 members, staring ahead like they weren't being watched by the whole town. The moderator opened the floor to comments. Zoya was the first to stand. "Ms. Harris didn't make me feel guilty. She made me feel responsible for learning, for caring, for using what I know." Applause followed her back to her seat. Then came the critics. A father in a tailored suit called Leah divisive. A mother accused her of emotional manipulation. The word agenda floated through the air like smoke. Leah stood when her name was called. She walked slowly to the podium. "I was told to teach standards, so I did. I was told to teach truth, so I did. I was told to care about students, so I did. And now I'm being told that truth has made people uncomfortable. But education was never meant to be a cushion. It was meant to be a mirror. And sometimes what we see in the mirror demands we change." The room held its breath. Leah stepped back, and the students rose to their feet, one by one, until half the room was standing, until the silence could no longer hold. The board recessed into private session. Leah stepped outside into the cool night air. No cameras, no speeches, just stars. She didn't know which way the vote would go, but she knew this: they couldn't put the truth back in a box. Not anymore. An hour later, The board returned. The chair spoke flatly. After deliberation, the board has decided not to terminate Miss Harris's employment at this time. Gasps, cheers, tears. They hadn't endorsed her, but they hadn't silenced her either. She would return, not because they wanted her, but because she had earned it, because the students had demanded it, because the bell still rang. Leah returned to room 214 on a Thursday morning. Students were already waiting outside the door when she arrived. They didn't say much, just stood a little taller when she passed. Inside, the desks were exactly as she left them, but something felt different. There was no more pretending. Everyone knew what she stood for now, and what she had risked. She wrote on the board, "What is history trying to teach us?" The students stared for a moment, then picked up their pens. Some wrote fast. Others paused, thinking carefully. No one asked, "Is this for a grade?" They knew better. This was about legacy. When they finished, Leah stood in front of them and did something she hadn't done all year. She sat right on the edge of her desk. "You fought for this space," she said softly. "You fought for the right to learn fully, to learn truthfully. That fight doesn't end here." A quiet settled over the room. There will be other rooms, other people who ask you to forget, to soften, to stay quiet. You don't owe them your silence. Someone in the back whispered, "We won't." Leah nodded. "Good, because history isn't over. It's watching." As the bell rang, students didn't rush out. They lingered. A few hugged her, one left a note on her desk. "You didn't just teach us history. You reminded us we're part of it." Later that day, Leah found herself alone in the classroom. She packed slowly, not because she had to leave, but because it was time to let the students carry the torch. They had already proved they were ready. She picked up the little desk bell from her shelf, the one she rang every first day, held it in her hand, and smiled. She wasn't done teaching. Maybe not here forever, but somewhere. Because the bell never truly stops ringing. It just finds a new room, a new voice, a new truth to tell. 1 year later, room 214 had a new teacher. Different decorations, different tone. But on the shelf by the window sat a small silver bell. Untouched, unexplained, left behind. Leah Harris stood at the front of a crowded auditorium. This time, not as a teacher, as a speaker. She had been invited to deliver the keynote at a national education summit, Truth in the Classroom. She stood behind the podium, looking out at a sea of educators, students, parents, and policymakers. When I first became a teacher, I thought my job was to explain the past. But I've come to understand my job was to prepare the future. He paused. Not by hiding from hard truths, but by meeting them head on, by letting our students ask the hard questions, and by giving them the courage to keep asking when the world tells them to stop. Applause swelled. Leah continued, "They told me I was too political, too passionate, too much, but what they really meant was too unwilling to lie. Louder applause. Some stood. Let me tell you something. I may not be in room 214 anymore, but I know this. Once you teach with truth, you never go back. You can't. Because the bell never stops ringing. After the speech, she was surrounded. Young teachers asked for advice. Students told her she inspired them to study education. One quiet librarian handed her a worn envelope. Inside was a printed photo, a group of students in black shirts holding signs that read, "Let Leah teach. History is not controversial. We are still learning." On the back, a note, "We never stopped listening." Leah returned home that night and set the photo on her desk. Next to it, a fresh lesson plan. She had taken a new position, visiting professor at a university, training future educators. Her classroom was bigger now, her reach wider, but her mission unchanged. She rang the bell before each lecture, a symbol, a reminder that truth echoes, even when you think no one is listening. And when enough voices rise to meet it, it becomes movement.